When old-timers fermented wild roots into medicine, they often dropped a single pure copper nail into the wooden barrel. For decades, modern scientists laughed at this tradition, until they realized the copper was actively killing a very specific, deadly bacteria. You've probably been taught that fermenting anything without a fridge is asking for trouble, that the moment you lose refrigeration, your food is on a countdown to rot. The people who settled these mountains didn't have that luxury, and they didn't just survive. They built an entire preservation system that ran on zero electricity, zero sealed jars, and a handful of tricks that sound like superstition until you understand the chemistry underneath them. And it started with something as small as a nail. Picture it. A cabin tucked into a holler. No road out. Winter coming. There's a wooden barrel in the corner packed with wild roots. Things you'd walk right past today. Sitting at the bottom of that barrel, quietly doing its job, is one bright copper nail. No thermometer, no pH strips, no refrigeration. Just an old piece of metal and a body of knowledge passed down so many times nobody remembered where it started. Today you're going to learn that whole system, not just the copper nail, though we'll get into exactly why it worked, and the one dangerous mistake that turns it from a preservation trick into a poison. You'll learn how Appalachian folk medicine turned a root cellar into a pharmacy, how a jar of fire cider fits into the same tradition, and why the same people who fermented these barrels could spot wild ginseng from 30 feet away and knew it was worth more than the silver in their pocket. This is the off-grid preservation system the mountains ran on. Let's start at the bottom of the barrel. Before we go further, I'll say this. Everything I've gathered on these old remedies I've put into 3 books over at earlsizemore.myshopify.com. Links below if you want them. Now, back to the mountain. Here's what those old-timers couldn't have explained but understood by result. Copper is naturally antimicrobial. Scientists have a name for it now, the oligodynamic effect. When certain microbes touch a copper surface, copper ions bleed off, punch holes in the microbe cell membrane, and scramble the machinery inside it. The bug dies. This isn't folklore anymore. It's why hospitals started putting copper on door handles and bed rails. A copper surface can kill bacteria that stainless steel would happily let sit there for days. Now put that in a fermenting barrel. Wild roots, wild yeast, no way to sterilize anything. The single biggest fear in an uncontrolled ferment is the wrong microbe taking hold before the good bacteria drop the acidity and lock the batch in. That copper nail gave the good guys a head start. It suppressed some of the aggressive spoilage bacteria in those critical first days, including, in the worst cases, the family of bacteria that causes botulism, which thrives in exactly the low-oxygen environment a sealed barrel creates. The mountain healers didn't know the word botulism. They just knew barrels with the nail went bad far less often than barrels without it. So the old-timers were right. And here's where you need to be dead honest with yourself, because this is the part the miracle hack videos skip. Copper doesn't only kill microbes. In enough quantity, it poisons you too. The same ions that shred a bacterial membrane don't care that you're a person. Ferments are acidic, that's the whole point. And acid pulls metal out of copper faster than plain water ever would. Leave a raw copper nail sitting in a sour, acidic ferment for weeks, and it will leach copper straight into the food. Small amounts give you a stomachache. Larger amounts over time cause real copper toxicity, nausea, vomiting, liver stress. This is the exact reason you're told never to store or cook acidic food in bare copper cookware. So how did they get away with it? 2 things. The nail was small, so the total copper was limited. And it usually didn't stay in for the full ferment. It did its work in the dangerous early days and came out. The trick was never that copper makes it safe. The trick was that a little copper, briefly, tips the odds early, and then you get it out of there. If you take one thing from this section, take that. The nail is not a magic safety charm you leave in and forget. Used carelessly, it trades one danger for another. used the way the mountains actually used it. Small, brief, deliberate. It was one clever tool in a much bigger system. Now let's get practical, because there's a fair question hiding here. If the copper nail is risky, how did the barrel stay safe at all? The answer is the part the nail was only assisting: the brine. Here's the mechanism you actually need to trust. When you submerge chopped roots in salt water and keep the air out, you create a world that favors one specific family of good bacteria, the lactic acid bacteria. They're already on the plants. They wake up, they eat the natural sugars, and they excrete lactic acid. That acid steadily drops the acidity until the whole batch is too sour for anything harmful to survive. That's the engine. Salt buys the good bacteria time early on, oxygen gets kept out, and acid finishes the job. The copper nail was only ever a bouncer at the door for the first few dangerous days. The brine is what actually ran the room. So if you ever want to do this yourself, safely, you lean on the brine and you skip the bare metal. The old rules that kept mountain families alive still hold. Use enough salt, roughly a couple of tablespoons per quart of water, is the classic starting point, so the good bacteria get their head start. Keep everything under the liquid line, because what pokes up into the air is what grows fuzz. Use a clean weight to hold the roots down. Let it work at cool room temperature and give it time. Sour smell, cloudy brine, a pleasant tang, those are success. Slimy, fuzzy, pink, or genuinely rotten, those mean you dump it and start over. Your nose was the original safety instrument, and it still works. 2 hard lines to never cross. Don't drop a bare copper nail into a finished ferment and leave it sitting for weeks. That's how the trick turns to poison. And when in doubt with anything low acid and sealed, throw it out. Nothing in that barrel is worth a hospital trip. The mountains respected these rules precisely because they'd buried people who didn't. Now step back from the barrel and look at the whole room. To a mountain family, the root cellar wasn't a pantry. It was the closest thing they had to a pharmacy, and every root going into those ferments was chosen for 2 jobs at once: feed you through winter and doctor you when you got sick. That's the mindset you have to get into. There was no line between food and medicine. A sour ferment of wild roots wasn't a side dish, it was a daily dose. Think about what that dirt-floored room had to do. No electricity, no fridge, temperatures that swung from near freezing to muggy. Somehow food had to keep for months without turning into a science experiment. The answer was fermentation. Letting the right bacteria eat the sugars, drop the acidity, and turn the whole batch into an environment nothing dangerous wants to live in. Acid is the preservative. Sour is the proof it worked. The roots themselves did double duty. Sassafras, dug in the fall, went into ferments and teas that thinned the blood and warmed you up. Wild ginger and various bitter roots settled bad stomachs. And the prize of the whole cellar, the one you'd guard like money, was ginseng. Which brings us to something you need to understand about these people. They could read the forest floor like a page. Wild ginseng doesn't announce itself, it hides among lookalikes, and pulling it at the wrong time or the wrong way kills the patch forever. A skilled digger knew to look for the compound leaf with 5 leaflets, the distinctive red berries in late summer, the specific shady slopes it favored. They knew to wait until the berries ripened so the plant could reseed, and to replant the next so the patch survived another generation. That wasn't sentimentality, it was economics. A pound of wild ginseng was worth more than almost anything else they could carry out of those woods. The same eye that told them which root to ferment told them which root to sell. So the cellar wasn't random. Every root in it was there, because someone who couldn't call a doctor and couldn't drive to a store had learned, by trial and hard consequence, exactly what that root did to a human body, and exactly how to keep it from spoiling. The copper nail protected the batch. The knowledge of what went into the batch is what made it medicine. If the copper nail is the trick, Fire Cider is the masterpiece. And it's the one piece of this whole system you can actually make in your kitchen tonight, safely, exactly the way they did. Here's the beauty of it. Fire Cider solves the same problem as the barrel. preserving potent plants with no refrigeration. But it does it with acid you can trust, instead of metal you can't. The whole thing is built on raw apple cider vinegar, and that vinegar is doing the same job the good bacteria did in the barrel. It's so acidic that nothing dangerous can grow in it. No copper needed, no botulism risk. The acid is the safety. The concept is simple. You take the most medicinal, pungent things the mountains could get their hands on, chop them, pack them into a jar, and drown them in raw vinegar. Then you wait. Over weeks, the vinegar pulls the active compounds out of every ingredient and holds them in a shelf-stable liquid that keeps for months in a cupboard. What went in was whatever fought a cold hardest. Horseradish and hot pepper to clear the sinuses and get the blood moving. Garlic and onion for their antimicrobial punch. Ginger to settle the stomach and warm you from the inside. Often a bitter root or two from that same cellar. The mixture was deliberately, brutally strong. This was medicine, not a beverage. You took a spoonful at the first scratch in your throat, and you felt it burn all the way down. And here's how it ties back to the barrel. Same instinct, two tools. In the barrel, they used living bacteria and a copper assist to reach an acidic, protected state. In the Fire Cider jar, they skipped the risk entirely and started with acid already in the bottle. Both roads lead to the same destination. Potent plants, preserved without power, ready when sickness came. Fire Cider is just the safer, more controllable version of the exact same idea, which is probably why it's the one that survived intact into modern kitchens while the copper barrel faded into a story. If you only ever build one piece of this system, build this one. It's forgiving, it's shelf-stable, and it fits in a mason jar on your counter. The barrel gets the attention, but it never worked alone. A mountain family ran 3 or 4 preservation engines at once, and each one covered a weakness in the others. Fermentation handled the roots and the greens. But meat needed something stronger, and that's where smoke and salt came in. Salt was the backbone. A hog killed in the cold months got packed in it, sometimes for weeks, until the salt pulled enough water out of the meat that nothing could rot it. Water is what bacteria need to live, and salt curing simply takes the water away. Then came the smoke. Hung in a small, dark smokehouse over a low, cool, smoldering fire, that salted meat picked up a coating of natural preservatives from the smoke itself, compounds that kill surface bacteria and keep bugs and mold off. Weeks of patient smoke, and a ham would hang safely through summer heat that would have destroyed fresh meat in a day. Then there was the cold ground. The root cellar wasn't just a room, it was engineering. Dug into a hillside or down below the frost line, it used the constant temperature of the earth itself to stay cool in summer and above freezing in winter. Apples, potatoes, turnips, whole cabbages, buried in sand or straw, kept for months in that steady dark. No power, no moving parts, just the thermal mass of the mountain doing the work a refrigerator does today. Put it together and you see the real picture. Ferment what ferments well. Salt and smoke the meat. Bury the hard vegetables in the cold ground. Dry the herbs and the beans in the rafters. 4 engines, each one covering for the others, so that if one batch failed, the family didn't. That redundancy was the whole point. When your survival rode on it, you never trusted just one method. None of this worked without timing, and the timing was brutal. The mountain year was a calendar of deadlines, and missing one meant going without. Spring was for greens and the first digging. As the ground thawed, the early wild plants came up, and you gathered them fresh because you'd been eating preserved food for 5 straight months. Spring was also when you started the first ferments of the year, using what the woods offered before the gardens produced anything at all. Summer was the building season. Everything grew at once, which meant everything had to be caught at once. You didn't preserve when it was convenient, you preserved when the plant was ready, and the plant decided, not you. Berries ripened on their own schedule. A root was strongest at a specific point in its cycle. Missed the window and the medicine in it was weaker, or gone. Fall was the hardest push, and the most important. This was when the roots held their peak power, when the sugars had gone down into the ground for winter. Sassafras, burdock, the medicinal barks, the wild ginseng, all of it came out of the ground in fall, because that's when it was worth the most, both as medicine and as money. Fall was when the barrels got packed, the hogs got killed once the weather turned cold enough to work the meat safely, and the cellar got filled to the ceiling. Then winter. Winter was when you lived on all of it. No new food coming in, just the slow drawing down of everything you'd put up. And if you'd read the calendar right all year, the cellar lasted until spring. If you'd misjudged a single season, you learned about it in February, when there was nothing you could do. That pressure is why these people knew their plants so precisely. The calendar didn't forgive mistakes. So let's put the whole system back together, because no single piece was ever meant to stand alone. Start with the forest, the knowledge to find the right plants, to spot wild ginseng on a shady slope, to know which roots healed and which ones hurt. That knowledge fed everything else. Then the root cellar, a cold, dark room doing the work of a refrigerator with nothing but dirt and time. Then the two preservation engines, the fermentation barrel, where living bacteria and a small, brief copper assist raced to lock the batch into a safe, sour, shelf-stable state. And the fire cider jar, where raw vinegar did the same job with none of the risk. Food and medicine, the same thing, kept alive through winter without a single watt of power. That's the system. Foraging, cold storage, fermentation, and acid extraction, all feeding each other. Miss one piece and the others get harder. Together they let a family with no road out and no store nearby stay fed and stay doctored through months they had no other way to survive. And here's why it still matters to you, sitting there with a fridge humming in the next room. Every one of these tricks was a solution to a hard constraint, and hard constraints breed real ingenuity. The copper nail wasn't superstition, it was applied chemistry, 300 years before anyone had the words for it. Fire cider wasn't a folk remedy in the dismissive sense, it was shelf-stable plant medicine engineered around the one preservative they could always trust. These people were not primitive. They were problem solvers working with a smaller toolbox than yours, and some of their answers were flat-out brilliant. You don't have to move off-grid to use any of this. Make the fire cider. It works, it keeps, it costs almost nothing. Learn one wild plant well enough to trust it. Understand why acid preserves and why bare copper doesn't belong in your food. You're not going backward. You're picking up tools that got set down too early, back when we decided the fridge had made all of it obsolete. The old-timers dropped a copper nail in a barrel and outsmarted a bacteria they couldn't even see. The least we can do is remember how.